He thought it was just another sweltering afternoon, a small kindness for his daughter who deserved the world. But when he counted out the last of his change for a single scoop of ice cream, he never expected the woman behind the counter to look at him with eyes that saw more than a struggling father. She saw a man who could save her from a life she no longer wanted. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the heat, radiated in shimmering waves from the asphalt. A suffocating blanket that pressed down on the city. Liam felt it in the worn fabric of his work shirt sticking to his back, and in the tired groan of the minivan's air conditioning, which had given up an hour ago beside him. His daughter Maya hummed a tuneless song. Her face pressed against the warm glass of the passenger window, her pigtails bouncing with an energy he couldn't remember having himself. It was her half-birthday, a tradition they'd started after her mother was gone, a small anchor in the year to remind them that joy didn't need a formal invitation. It could show up on any random Tuesday in July, but this year, joy was on a tight budget. He had $17.43 in his wallet and a gas tank hovering just above empty. The construction job he'd been counting on had been pushed back another week, and the late notices were starting to pile up on the kitchen counter like a paper mountain of everything he was failing at. He pulled into a spot in front of a small strip mall, its paint faded by years of unrelenting sun. A hand-painted sign in the window of a corner shop read the Scoop Spot, with a drawing of a lopsided ice cream cone smiling beneath it. It was the only place in the neighborhood they hadn't tried yet, and probably the only one he could afford. "Can we go?" Daddy Maya asked, her voice a hopeful whisper. He turned and forced a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Of course, sweetheart, for my half-birthday girl." Anything, he didn't tell her that anything had a very specific price limit. He didn't tell her that the change he'd scraped together from the bottom of a jar was all they had for treats until his next paycheck landed. If it landed, he just took her hand, squeezed it tight, and led her toward the door. The bell above chimed softly, a sweet, gentle sound that was immediately drowned out by the hum of the freezers inside the shop. Was cool and quiet, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. The air smelled like sugar and waffle cones, and something clean like lemon polish. The walls were painted a soft mint green, and the floor was a classic black and white tile, scuffed in places but immaculately clean. It wasn't a modern, sterile place. It was something older, something built with care. Behind the long glass counter, a woman was wiping down the stainless steel with a soft cloth. She looked up as they entered, and her smile was polite but distant. She wore a simple white apron over a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She looked too elegant for a place like this, too composed like a portrait, mistakenly hung in a child's playroom. She didn't belong, but she was trying to. Maya ran to the glass, her small hands pressing against it, as she stared at the mountains of colorful ice cream. Her eyes were wide with a kind of pure, unadulterated delight that made Liam's chest ache. He followed her, his own gaze scanning the handwritten menu board taped to the wall. His eyes skipped over the sundaes, the milkshakes, the double scoops, and landed on the smallest option available. 1 scoop, $1.75. He did the math in his head, subtracting it from the pile of coins in his pocket. It would leave them just enough for a gallon of milk on the way home. Maybe he took a deep breath, letting the sweet air fill his lungs for a moment, trying to absorb some of its peace. "You decide what you want," he said to Maya. His voice softer than he intended. She pointed a small finger at a tub of bright pink ice cream studded with what looked like rainbow candies. "That one. The one with the magic in it." Liam chuckled. "Magic it is, 1 scoop of magic coming right up." He stepped up to the counter, feeling the woman's quiet gaze on him. He cleared his throat and tried to sound more confident than he felt. "We'll just have 1 scoop of the magic one, please." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. She reached for a cone and a silver scoop, moving with an easy grace that seemed at odds with the simple task. She didn't say a word, just scooped a perfect sphere of pink ice cream and placed it on top of a sugar cone with practiced precision. She held it out to Maya, whose eyes were now the size of dinner plates. As Maya took the cone, her little hands trembling with excitement, Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out the handful of change he'd been clutching. It felt like a confession, laying it all bare on the polished counter. The jingle of the coins sounded too loud in the quiet shop quarters, dimes, nickels, and a few stray pennies. He counted them out slowly, his calloused fingers fumbling with the small silver discs. $1.50, $1.61.70. He was 5 cents short. His face flushed hot with a familiar sting of shame. He looked up at the woman, expecting impatience, maybe a flicker of annoyance, but her eyes held something else, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was softer than that, more like recognition. He searched his other pocket, hoping for a stray nickel, but found only lint. "I'm so sorry," he started, his voice tight. "Thought I had enough." The woman didn't even glance at the coins. She just pushed them gently back toward him with one finger. "Don't worry about it," she said. Her voice was low and calm, like a quiet river. "On the house," he blinked on the house. "Yeah," she offered a small, tight smile. "We're running a special today. First cone of the afternoon is free, lucky you." Maya, who had been too preoccupied with her ice cream to notice the transaction, looked up and beamed. "Lucky us." Liam stared at the woman, still unsure. He knew there was no special. He'd seen the menu board. He knew this was an act of charity. But the way she did it with such quiet dignity, without making him feel small, it was a kindness he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. She just nodded once and turned back to wiping the counter. As if nothing had happened, but something had happened. In the cool quiet of that little ice cream shop, a stranger had seen his struggle and hadn't looked away. She'd offered grace instead of judgment, and for a man who felt like he was drowning, that small gesture felt like air. Liam guided Maya to a small booth in the corner of the shop. The vinyl seats were a cheerful cherry red, cracked in a few places but clean. He slid in across from her, watching as she took her first bite of the ice cream, her eyes closing in a moment of pure bliss. "Is it magic?" she asked. Her voice muffled by the mouthful of sugar and cold cream. He smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, it is." He leaned back against the seat, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all day. The woman behind the counter, who he now realized he hadn't even gotten a name for, continued to work in a quiet rhythm. She polished the glass of the display case until it gleamed, refilled a container of sprinkles, and checked the temperature of the freezers, all with a kind of detached efficiency. She never looked over at them, never made him feel like he was being watched or pitied, and he was grateful for that. He studied her from a distance, trying to piece together the story she was too young to own. A place like this, he thought, and too poised to be just an employee. Her clothes were simple, but the way they hung on her frame spoke of quality. Not off the rack. Her watch was a thin silver band with a dark face. No brand name he could see, but it looked understated and expensive. A quiet detail that didn't match the rest of the picture. He wondered what had brought her to this sleepy corner of a city that had mostly forgotten itself. He wondered if she was lonely here in this quiet shop with only the hum of the freezers for company. Maya finished her cone with a sigh of deep satisfaction, a pink smudge painted across her cheek. She slid out of the booth and ran back to the counter. Liam followed her, ready to thank the woman again and leave before they overstayed their welcome. Maya stood on her tiptoes to peer over the counter. "Thank you for the magic ice cream," she said earnestly. The woman looked down at her, and for the first time her polite smile softened into something real and warm. "You're very welcome," she said, her eyes flicking to Liam for just a second before returning to Maya. "I'm glad you liked it." Liam put a hand on Maya's shoulder. "We should get going. Let you get back to work." The woman nodded, but didn't move. "It's a quiet day," she said, almost to herself, sometimes too quiet. Maya tilted her head. "Do you get lonely here?" Liam felt a pang of second-hand embarrassment at his daughter's bluntness, But the woman didn't flinch. She just looked at Maya and said softly, "Sometimes everyone does," and in that simple, honest admission, Liam felt a connection he hadn't expected, a shared thread of quiet solitude that ran between his world of unpaid bills and her world of polished counters and unspoken stories. He took Maya's hand and led her to the door as they stepped back out into the oppressive heat. The bell chiming behind them, he glanced back one last time. The woman was watching them, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a depth that made him feel like she wasn't just seeing a father and a daughter. She was seeing something more, something she recognized, something she missed. They walked back to the minivan in a comfortable silence, Maya's hand tucked safely in his. The heat didn't feel quite as suffocating now. The weight in his chest had lightened just a little as he buckled Maya into her car seat. She looked up at him with those wide, knowing eyes of hers. "Daddy, can we come back and see the ice cream lady again?" He smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, I think we can." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't have the money for more ice cream, and he wasn't the kind of man who accepted charity twice. But something about the woman in the quiet shop had gotten under his skin, a splinter of kindness he couldn't quite ignore. He started the minivan, the engine turning over with a tired sigh, and pulled out of the parking lot as he drove away. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something important behind. A conversation that had just begun, a connection that felt too fragile to be real. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the small shop shrinking in the distance, its hand-painted sign a cheerful splash of color against the faded backdrop of the city. He told himself it was just an ice cream shop, just a moment of kindness from a stranger. But deep down he knew it was more than that. It was a reminder that even in the middle of a struggle, when the world felt hot and heavy and unforgiving, there were still small pockets of grace to be found. And sometimes those small pockets were all you needed to keep going back in the shop. Annalise watched the faded minivan pull away and disappear into the shimmering heat. She leaned against the counter, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the sudden warmth that had bloomed in her chest. She hadn't planned on giving them the ice cream for free. It was an impulse, a reaction to the quiet dignity in the man's eyes as he counted out his last few coins. She had seen plenty of people struggle in her life, but usually from a distance through the tinted windows of a town car or across the polished surface of a boardroom. This was different. This was close-up real. She saw the worn-out creases around his eyes, the calluses on his fingers, the way he tried to shield his daughter from the harsh reality of their situation. It was a kind of quiet strength she hadn't witnessed in years. Her own father, a man who had built an empire on ruthless acquisitions and calculated risks, would have called it weakness. He would have seen the man's poverty as a personal failing, a lack of ambition. But Annalise saw something else. She saw love, raw and unconditional, a love that was willing to sacrifice everything for a single moment of joy. For a child, she picked up the small pile of change he had left on the counter and held it in her palm. The coins were warm from his hand. She closed her fingers around them. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt something other than the cold weight of her own loneliness. She felt a connection, a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe she hadn't run away from her life just to hide. Maybe she had run here to find something she didn't even know she was looking for. She slipped the coins into her apron pocket and went back to wiping down the counter. But the quiet of the shop felt different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the echo of a little girl's laughter and the memory of a man's grateful eyes. And Annalise knew with a certainty that both scared and thrilled her that this was not the last time she would see them. The next day dawned with the same relentless heat. Liam spent the morning on the phone, chasing down leads for work, each call ending with the same polite dismissal. "We'll keep your number on file. Thanks for checking in by noon." The $17 from yesterday had dwindled to just under 10 after buying milk and a loaf of bread. He sat at the small kitchen table staring at a stack of bills, his head in his hands, the weight of it all pressing down on him like the humid air outside. Maya was in the living room, coloring quietly. her world still small and safe and untouched by the anxieties that gnawed at him. He wouldn't let it touch her. He promised himself that every single day, but promises didn't pay the rent. Around 2 o'clock, he decided they needed to get out of the apartment. The suffocating silence was getting to him. He packed a small cooler with peanut butter sandwiches and a couple of juice boxes, and they headed to the local park. It was a small patch of green with a rusty swing set and a squeaky merry-go-round, but it was theirs as Maya played. Liam sat on a bench in the shade, trying to quiet the frantic buzzing in his mind. That's when he heard the familiar chime of an ice cream truck turning the corner, its tinny music, a siren song. For every kid in the park, Maya's head shot up, her eyes wide with hope. Liam's stomach dropped. He didn't have the cash, not even for a cheap popsicle. He was about to tell her? No, gently, of course. When a sleek silver sedan pulled into the parking lot, a car so out of place in this neighborhood, it might as well have been a spaceship. The driver's side door opened, and the ice cream lady from the shop stepped. Out she was dressed differently today, in a simple linen dress and sandals. No apron, no name tag. But it was her. There was no mistaking the quiet grace in the way she moved. She walked over to the ice cream truck, ordered 2 cones, and then turned and walked directly toward them. Liam's heart started pounding, a mixture of confusion and a strange, inexplicable hope. She stopped in front of their bench and held out one of the cones to Maya, a perfect swirl of vanilla with rainbow sprinkles. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Thought you might be here." Maya took the cone with a grateful gasp. "Thank you, ice cream lady." Annalise smiled, then looked at Liam. "Got you one too," she said, holding out the second cone. Chocolate. He hesitated, his pride warring with the genuine warmth in her eyes. "I can't," he started to say, but she cut him off gently. "It's just ice cream, not a contract." He took the cone, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief second. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low. She looked away for a moment, her gaze drifting to the kids playing on the swings. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you two," she said quietly, "and because I think maybe I needed to find a reason to give away free ice cream." Liam didn't know what to say to that. He didn't know what any of this meant. But as he sat there on that park bench, eating a chocolate ice cream cone, he couldn't afford, next to a woman who felt both like a stranger and someone he'd known his whole life. He realized he didn't want it to stop. Annalise had not been in the neighborhood by accident. She had spent the morning driving through the city's quieter, forgotten streets, telling herself she was just exploring, but knowing deep down she was looking for them. She didn't know his name or where he lived, but she remembered the minivan, the faded bumper sticker with a picture of a sunflower, and the general direction he had turned when he left her shop. It was a long shot, a ridiculous one, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see them again, to make sure they were okay, to make sure the kindness she'd offered wasn't just a fleeting moment in their difficult lives. When she finally spotted the minivan parked near the small playground, her heart had given a strange lurch, a mixture of relief and nervousness. What was she even doing here, chasing down a stranger and his daughter like some kind of benevolent stalker? It was the kind of impulsive, emotional decision she had spent her entire adult life training herself to avoid. But she couldn't turn back now, not after seeing Maya on the swings, her laughter carrying on the warm air. So she had bought the ice cream, a simple peace offering, a reason to approach without seeming too strange. Now sitting on the bench beside Liam, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. He ate his ice cream slowly, thoughtfully, not looking at her, but she could feel his presence, a quiet solidness that was both grounding and intimidating. She watched Maya chase a butterfly across the grass, her new cone held aloft like a torch. "There's a purity to her joy," Annalise said softly. "It's untouched," Liam nodded. "Yeah, I'm trying to keep it that way." He glanced at her, his eyes holding a question he wasn't ready to ask aloud. "What about you?" he asked instead. "You always seem so—" he trailed off, not sure of the right word. Calm, she supplied with a small, self-deprecating smile. It's a practice skill. When you grow up in a world where emotions are considered a liability, you learn to build good walls. Liam didn't press. He just nodded in understanding. He knew about walls. He had built his own, thick and high around his heart. After his wife passed away, his were made of grief and pride. Hers, he suspected, were made of something colder, something lonelier. Maya ran back to them, her face now smeared with a combination of vanilla ice cream and dirt. "Can the ice cream lady come to our house for dinner?" she asked Liam directly, her unfiltered honesty. A shock to the quiet afternoon, Liam's face flushed. He opened his mouth to make an excuse, but Annalise spoke first. "Love that," she said, her gaze meeting Liam's over Maya's head, a silent challenge in her eyes. "If it's okay with your dad," Liam was caught. He looked at Maya's hopeful face, at the quiet confidence in Annalise's eyes, and felt his own walls begin to crumble just a little bit. "Yeah," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It's okay with me." He didn't know what he would serve or how he would hide the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, but for the first time in a long time he was willing to let someone in, even if it was just for one night. The drive to Liam's apartment was quiet, but charged with a nervous energy that hummed just beneath the surface. Liam gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the familiar cracked streets of his neighborhood. He was acutely aware of the sleek silver sedan following them, a silent testament to the chasm between his world and hers. His apartment was on the second floor of a tired-looking brick building with a fire escape that was more rust than metal. The paint on the door was peeling, and the welcome mat was frayed at the edges. It was a place of survival, not comfort, and he had never been more aware of its shortcomings than he was at this moment. As he unlocked the door, he hesitated, turning to Annalise, who stood behind him on the narrow landing. "It's not much," he said, his voice low. A preemptive apology. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here for the decor." "Liam?" When he pushed the door open, the small apartment greeted them with the scent of old books and the faint hum of a window air conditioning unit struggling against the heat. The living room was tidy but worn, a threadbare rug covering the scuffed wooden floors, a stack of Maya's drawings taped to one wall, the only splash of color in a room of muted grays and browns. Liam watched as Annalise stepped inside on her eyes, taking in everything, not with judgment, but with a quiet curiosity. She ran a finger along the edge of a bookshelf, then stopped at the wall of drawings, her gaze lingering on a crayon portrait of a man and a little girl, holding hands under a lopsided sun. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. Liam blinked, surprised. She saw the love, not the lack, the warmth, not the wear. And in that moment he felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. Maya immediately took on the role of tour guide, pulling Annalise by the hand to show her the castle she had built out of cardboard boxes in the corner of the room. And the stuffed bear that had a missing eye, but was still the king of all the other toys. Liam escaped to the kitchen, his heart still pounding. He opened the fridge and stared at its meager contents. A few eggs, a half-empty carton of milk, a wilting head of lettuce. He had no idea what he was going to make for dinner. He had invited a woman who drove a luxury car and wore clothes that probably cost more than his rent, to a meal he couldn't afford to cook. He was starting to panic when Annalise appeared in the kitchen doorway, a small smile playing on her lips. "Need a hand?" she asked. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't even know where to start." She stepped closer and peered into the fridge, her expression thoughtful. She didn't recoil. She didn't offer a pitying glance. Instead, she rolled up the sleeves of her linen dress and said with a surprising amount of confidence, "I think we can work with this." "How do you feel about omelets?" Liam stared at her, this elegant stranger who seemed completely unfazed by the poverty of his kitchen. And for the first time he didn't feel shame. He felt a flicker of something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Annalise moved around the small kitchen with a surprising ease. She found a cutting board in a dusty drawer, a whisk in the back of a cupboard, and a non-stick pan that had seen better days. She cracked the eggs with one hand, a skill that seemed at odds with her polished appearance, and began to chop the lettuce with a small paring knife. Liam stood back, watching her, a sense of surrealism washing over him. He felt like he was in a dream, a strange, beautiful dream, where a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine was making omelets in his cramped kitchen. Maya sat at the small kitchen table, providing a running commentary on Annalise's chopping technique. "You're doing it wrong," she said matter-of-factly. "My daddy says you have to rock the knife like a boat." Annalise paused and looked at the knife, then at Maya with a serious expression. "You're right, the boat. Method, it is far superior," she said, adopting a new rocking motion with the knife. Maya giggled, a sound that filled the small apartment with a warmth that had been missing for too long. As Annalise cooked, she and Liam fell into a comfortable rhythm. He found plates in the cupboard. She asked him where the salt was. He told her stories about Maya's first words. She told him about a trip she had once taken to a small coastal town where the houses were painted in bright blues and yellows. They didn't talk about their real lives, the lives that existed outside the four walls of his apartment. They didn't talk about his struggles or her secrets. They just talked like two people who had known each other for years, not hours. When the omelets were finally ready, they sat down at the small table together, three mismatched plates on a worn wooden surface. The food was simple, but it tasted like a feast to Liam. He couldn't remember the last time he had shared a meal with another adult in his own home. The last time the apartment had been filled with laughter. That wasn't just his and Maya's as they ate. Annalise glanced around the room again, her eyes lingering on the framed photo on the wall, a picture of a smiling woman with kind eyes and the same bright spark as Maya. "That's her," Liam said softly, following her gaze. "His wife, Sarah. She passed away 2 years ago." Annalise's smile faded, and she looked at him with a deep and genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Liam." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his plate. "Yeah, me too." There was a moment of silence, a shared acknowledgement of the ghost at their table, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a respectful one, a quiet space for a grief that was still very much alive later. As Liam washed the dishes and Annalise dried them, she turned to him and said, "You're a good father. Liam, you're doing an amazing job with her." He stopped scrubbing the pan and looked at her. Her words were simple, but they landed with a weight that brought a lump to his throat. No one had said that to him in a long time. No one had seen the effort, the struggle, the love that he poured into every single day. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Thank you for seeing it after dinner." They sat on the small balcony that overlooked the alleyway. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a sea of promises that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, her head in Annalise's lap, her small body rising and falling with each steady breath. Liam leaned against the railing, a warm mug of tea in his hands. The silence between them was different now, deeper, more intimate. Annalise gently stroked Maya's hair, her touch so tender it made Liam's heart ache. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Liam nodded. "She's my whole world." There was a long pause before Annalise spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted children," she said. "I was taught to see them as a distraction, a career killer, a liability." He turned to look at her, surprised by her confession. Her eyes were fixed on Maya, her expression a mixture of wistfulness and regret. "My father always said that love makes you weak, that attachments are for the foolish. He built an empire on that philosophy. He has more money than he could ever spend, and he's the most miserable person I know." Liam didn't know what to say, so he just listened. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Liam, and all you have is love." The words hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge connecting their two disparate worlds. He wanted to reach out to touch her, to tell her that she was wrong about herself, that she wasn't the cold, unfeeling person she had been taught to be. But he was afraid of what it would mean, afraid of how much he was starting to feel for this mysterious woman who had wandered into his life and turned it upside down. Instead, he just took a sip of his tea and stared out at the city lights, feeling a sense of hope so potent it almost scared him. Annalise looked down at Maya's sleeping face, a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her, washing over her. She had spent her entire life surrounded by beautiful things, priceless art, designer clothes, luxurious homes. But she had never held anything as precious as this sleeping child in her lap. She had built a fortress around her heart, brick by brick, year by year, convinced that vulnerability was a weakness she couldn't afford. But with Liam and Maya, that fortress was beginning to crumble, and she didn't know if she was terrified or relieved. She gently brushed a stray hair from Maya's forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment too long. She thought about her own childhood, a series of sterile environments and scheduled interactions. She had never been allowed to be messy, to be allowed to be a child. Her father had seen her as an extension of his legacy, a project to be molded and perfected. He had taught her to value success above all else, to see kindness as a transaction and love as a liability. And for a long time she had believed him. But now, sitting in this small, worn-out apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love, not money, she felt the hollowness of her own existence like a cavern in her chest. She had everything and nothing. All at once she looked up at Liam, who was watching her with a quiet intensity that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. He didn't see the heiress, the businesswoman, the woman on the cover of magazines. He saw her, the real her, the one who was lonely and scared and yearning for something she couldn't name. "What are you running from?" he asked, his voice gentle. She let out a long, slow breath. "My whole life," she said honestly. "I'm running from the person I was supposed to be, and I'm terrified I won't know how to be anyone else." He didn't offer any easy answers or false promises. He just held her gaze and said quietly, "Maybe you don't have to be anyone else. Maybe you just have to be you." And in that moment, Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, the possibility of a different kind of life. A life where she wasn't defined by her name or her net worth, but by the quiet moments of connection that made it all worthwhile. The next morning, Liam woke to the smell of coffee brewing, a scent that hadn't filled his apartment in months. He sat up on the couch where he had fallen asleep and rubbed his eyes. The first light of dawn was filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Annalise was in the kitchen, moving with a quiet efficiency that was both surprising and deeply comforting. She had found his old percolator in the back of a cupboard and somehow managed to make it work. She was wearing the same linen dress from the day before, now slightly wrinkled, but she looked more at home in his small kitchen than he had ever seen her look anywhere else. She turned as he stood up, a small smile on her face. "I found some coffee in a tin behind the flour," she said. "I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Thank you." She poured him a cup and handed it to him, their fingers brushing for a moment too long. The warmth of the mug seeped into his hands, but it was the warmth of her touch that lingered. Maya was still asleep on the couch, her breathing soft and even. Liam looked at her, then back at Annalise, a question hanging in the air between them. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low. Annalise's smile faded and she looked down at her own cup, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she said. "Honestly, I never planned for any of this." "Me neither," he admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft gurgle of the percolator. "I have to go," she said, finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I have a life, a company, responsibilities, people who are probably wondering where I am." Liam's heart sank. He had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. He had allowed himself to hope, to dream of a future that had her in it, and now that dream was slipping through his fingers like sand. He just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't pity, it wasn't regret, it was something deeper, something that looked a lot like pain. "This isn't goodbye, Liam," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's just, I'll be back," she promised. "I just need to figure some things out." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to hold on to that promise. like a lifeline, but he had been let down too many times before he had learned the hard way, that promises were fragile things, easily broken. He watched as she quietly gathered her things, her movements graceful and deliberate. She leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to Maya's forehead, then turned to him. Her eyes met his one last time, and in their depths he saw a reflection of his own heartbreak. Then she was gone. The apartment felt colder and emptier than it had before. She arrived. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of what he had so briefly had and lost. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet desperation for Liam. He picked up a few odd jobs here and there, a landscaping project that paid in cash, a painting gig for a neighbor, but it was never enough to get ahead. He was constantly treading water, the current of his debt, pulling him under a little more each day. Maya was quieter too. She asked about the ice cream lady every day at first, her voice full of a hopeful innocence that broke Liam's heart. With each passing day, her questions became less frequent, until finally they stopped altogether. She didn't forget, though. He could see it in the way she would sometimes stare out the window, a wistful expression on her face, or in the way she would clutch the small painted rock Annalise had given her at the park one afternoon. Liam found a final notice from their landlord taped to the door, an eviction notice that gave them 2 weeks to vacate the premises. He stared at the bold red letters, his blood running cold. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. He had failed. He had failed his daughter. He had failed himself. That night he sat on the edge of Maya's bed watching her sleep, her face so peaceful and untroubled. In the soft glow of her nightlight he felt a wave of despair, so profound it threatened to suffocate him. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe. And now he was about to make her homeless. He didn't know what to do. He had run out of options, out of time, out of hope. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since his wife had died, he let himself cry. Silent, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. He cried for his wife, for his daughter, for the life he had lost, and for the woman who had briefly made him believe that a different kind of life was possible. Just as he felt himself sinking into the abyss of his despair, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He ignored it at first, but it buzzed again and again. With a persistence that finally broke through his haze of grief, he picked it up and saw a series of texts from an unknown number. The first one was a picture, a photo of the front of his apartment building. The second was a short message, "Don't move, stay put, help is coming." The third was just 2 words, "Trust me." Liam's heart stopped. He stared at the messages, his mind racing. Who was this? How did they know where he lived? How did they know he was in trouble? And then he knew there was only one person it could be. Annalise. His first reaction was anger. How dare she swoop in and try to fix his life with her money? How dare she think she could solve his problems with a few text messages? But then another feeling crept in, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, relief. He didn't know what she was planning. He didn't know if he could trust her, but in that moment of utter desperation, her message was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He didn't reply to her texts. He just sat there staring at the phone, his heart a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't facing it alone. Annalise sat in the back of her town car, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. She had her phone clutched in her hand, her thumb hovering over Liam's contact information. She had been staring at it for the better part of an hour, trying to work up the courage to call him. What would she even say? "I'm sorry I disappeared. I'm sorry. I'm a billionaire. I'm sorry. I'm about to turn your life upside down." None of it felt right. She had spent the last few weeks in a self-imposed exile in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city she had ignored. Calls from her father, her board of directors, her army of assistants. She had just sat in the silence, trying to make sense of the new reality that had been thrust upon her. The reality of Liam and Maya had cracked open her carefully constructed world, and she couldn't put it back together again. She had tried to go back to her old life, to the boardrooms and the business deals, but it all felt hollow and meaningless. All she could think about was the small, worn-out apartment that had felt more like a home than her own. A little girl with a contagious laugh and a man with kind eyes and a tired smile. A man who had shown her what real strength looked like. She had hired a private investigator to find out more about him. A decision that had left a bitter taste in her mouth, but one she had felt was necessary. She needed to know the full extent of his struggle so she could help him in a way that wouldn't crush his pride. The investigator's report had been a gut punch, a litany of unpaid bills, overdue rent, and dwindling job prospects. It had confirmed what she already suspected: Liam was on the verge of losing everything, so she had made a decision, a bold, reckless decision that went against every rule she had ever lived by. She had used her vast resources to anonymously buy the apartment building he lived in and had instructed the management company to cancel his eviction and freeze his rent. Indefinitely, it was a temporary solution, she knew, but it would buy him time, and it would buy her time to figure out what came next. Now, as the car pulled up in front of the building, she felt a wave of nerves so intense it made her feel sick. What if he hated her for this? What if he saw it as an act of pity, a way for her to assuage her own guilt? She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at his window, a soft light glowing from within. She knew this was a risk, a huge one, but it was a risk she was willing to take because for the first time in her life she had found something worth fighting for. Something real, something true. She walked to the entrance of the building, her heart pounding in her chest. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her heels clicking on the worn linoleum. When she reached his door, she paused, her hand hovering over the wood. She could hear the faint sound of music coming from inside, a soft melody that was both sad and beautiful. She took another deep breath and knocked. The door opened a moment later and Liam stood there, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. Something she couldn't quite read. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at her as if he couldn't believe she was real. She could feel the tension radiating off him, a palpable force that filled the small space between them. "I know you're angry," she said, her voice soft and apologetic, "and you have every right to be. But please just let me explain." He didn't move. He just continued to stare at her. His expression a mask of stoicism. "I didn't mean to deceive." She continued, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know how to tell you who I was. I was afraid you would see me differently, that you would hate me for it." "I don't hate you," he said, his voice low and raspy. "I just don't understand. How could you not tell me? How could you let me think you were just some woman working in an ice cream shop?" "Because for the first time in my life, I felt like one," she said, her voice breaking. "I felt normal. I felt real. I didn't want to lose that." He finally stepped aside, letting her into the apartment. The air was thick with unspoken words, a chasm of misunderstanding and hurt between them. She stood in the middle of the living room, her hands clenched at her sides, feeling more vulnerable than she had ever felt in her life. "You bought the building, didn't you?" he asked, his voice flat. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't want you to lose your home. I didn't know what else to do." His jaw tightened and he looked away, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "I don't want your charity. Annalise, I don't want your money." "It's not charity," she said, her voice rising with a passion that surprised even herself. "It's not about the money. It's about you. It's about Maya. It's about the fact that in a few short days you made me feel more alive than I have in my entire life." He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a fire she hadn't seen before. "And what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to do with the fact that I'm falling in love with a woman who can buy and sell my entire world without even thinking about it?" Her breath caught in her throat. He was falling in love with her. The words hung in the air between them, a beautiful, terrifying truth that changed everything. "I don't know," she whispered, her own voice choked with emotion, "but I'm willing to figure it out with you if you'll let me." He stared at her for a long moment, his anger slowly dissolving into something else, something softer, something that looked a lot like hope. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to be with someone like you." "You don't have to be with someone like me," she said, her voice just as quiet. "You just have to be with me." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that was filled with all the longing and the fear and the hope that had been building between them for weeks. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances and new beginnings, a kiss that promised a future they would have to build together. One messy, beautiful step at a time. The next few months were a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries. Liam and Annalise navigated the uncharted territory of their new relationship with a mixture of caution and a surprising amount of grace. They were from two different worlds, and the collision of those worlds was often messy and complicated. But it was also beautiful and real. Annalise spent more and more time at Liam's apartment, trading her designer clothes for jeans and T-shirts and her five-star meals for burnt toast and takeout pizza. She learned how to fix a leaky faucet, how to braid Maya's hair, and how to find joy in the simple, quiet moments of everyday life. Liam, in turn, began to let his guard down. He started to trust Annalise, not just with his heart, but with his struggles. He let her help him find a new job at a local community center where he taught woodworking to at-risk youth. A job that didn't pay much, but filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He even let her take him and Maya on a weekend trip to a small cabin in the mountains, a trip that was filled with laughter and hiking and a sense of freedom he hadn't known was possible. There were still challenges. Of course, Annalise's father was furious about her new life, and he made his disapproval known in a series of scathing phone calls and threatening letters. The media also continued to follow their story, a modern-day fairy tale that they dissected and sensationalized with a relentless hunger. But Liam and Annalise faced it all together, their bond forged in the crucible of their shared vulnerability. They learned to lean on each other, to trust each other, and to find strength in their love. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Liam turned to Annalise and said, "I never thought I would find happiness again after Sarah died. I thought my life was over, but you brought me back to life. You showed me that it's possible to love again, to dream again." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was the one who was dead inside, Liam," she said. "You were the one who brought me back to life. You showed me what it means to be truly wealthy, to be rich in love and in joy." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together hand in hand, their hearts full of a love that was stronger than any obstacle the world could throw at them. A year later, Liam and Annalise stood on the porch of a small, charming house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was a fixer-upper, a project they had taken on together, a symbol of the new life they were building. Brick by brick, they had poured their love and their labor into it, transforming it from a neglected old house into a warm and inviting home. Maya was in the backyard playing on a brand-new swing set, her laughter carrying on the warm summer breeze. Liam wrapped his arms around Annalise from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You happy?" he asked. She leaned back into him and sighed contentedly. "More than I ever thought possible," she said. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Liam. Thank you for not giving up on us." He smiled and kissed her softly. "I should be thanking you," he said. "You saved me, Annalise. You saved us both." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts overflowing with a love that had weathered storms and defied expectations. They were from two different worlds, but they had found a common ground, a place where their hearts could meet and merge and create something beautiful and new. And as they watched their daughter swing higher and higher into the sky, they knew that their love story was just beginning, a story of hope, of healing, and of the transformative power of a love that was real and true, and strong enough to conquer all. The epilogue of their story was not written in headlines or financial reports, but in the quiet moments of their shared life. It was in the way Liam would wake up every morning to find Annalise already in the kitchen making coffee, her hair a messy halo in the morning light. It was in the way she would surprise him with tickets to a concert or a weekend getaway, just because it was in the way. He would build her a bookshelf for her ever-growing collection of novels, or fix the squeaky step on the porch without her even having to ask. It was in the way they would sit on the porch swing at night, their hands intertwined, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness. Their life was not a fairy tale. It was better than a fairy tale. It was real, it was messy, it was complicated, and it was beautiful. And as they stood on the porch of their new home watching their daughter chase butterflies in the backyard, they knew they had found their happily ever after, not in a castle or a palace, but in the simple everyday magic of a love that was built to last. A love that had been born in the most unexpected of places. An ice cream shop on a hot summer day, a love that had been nurtured by kindness and trust, and a shared belief in the power of second chances. It was a love that was as sweet and as satisfying as a scoop of magic ice cream on a hot summer day, and it was a love that would last a lifetime, and beyond their family grew, not just with the passing of time, but with the addition of a small, boisterous golden retriever that Maya named Sprinkles. The dog became a furry shadow, a joyful chaos that filled their home with muddy paw prints and unconditional love. Annalise found a new purpose not in running a corporation, but in starting a foundation dedicated to supporting single-parent families, providing resources for housing, education, and childcare. She used her business acumen and her vast network of contacts to build something meaningful, something that made a real difference in the lives of people like Liam, people who were struggling to keep their heads above water. She named it the Maya Project, a tribute to the little girl who had taught her the true meaning of wealth. Liam found his own fulfillment in his work at the community center. He became a mentor, a role model, a father figure to the kids who came through his workshop. He taught them not just how to build things with their hands, but how to build a life with purpose and with pride. He and Annalise became a team, a partnership in every sense of the word. They supported each other's dreams, they celebrated each other's successes, and they held each other up through the inevitable challenges that life threw their way. Their love story was not a secret anymore. It was a quiet testament to the power of human connection, a story that was whispered with a sense of wonder and admiration. In the community they had come to call home, they were the billionaire and the carpenter, the heiress and the single dad, the woman who had everything and the man who had nothing. But they had found in each other a love that transcended their differences, a love that was as solid and as enduring as the houses Liam built, and as bright and as hopeful as the smiles of the children. Annalise's foundation helped one cool autumn evening as they sat on the porch watching the leaves turn to fiery shades of red and gold. Liam turned to Annalise and took her hand. Her engagement ring, a simple, understated diamond that he had designed himself, glinted in the soft light. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I still can't believe you're real sometimes." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "I know the feeling," she said, "but we are real, Liam. We're real and we're here and we're not going anywhere." He pulled her close and kissed her, a deep and lingering kiss that was filled with all the love and the gratitude and the joy that had come to define their life together. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared sunsets and quiet mornings, a lifetime of laughter and of love, a lifetime of building a future together. One beautiful, messy, imperfect day at a time, the seasons continued to turn their life together, unfolding in a tapestry of ordinary moments that were anything but. A few years later, they stood side by side at Maya's high school graduation, her cap and gown a vibrant splash of blue against the green lawn. She was a confident young woman with her mother's smile and her father's kind eyes. She was also the valedictorian of her class, a testament to the love and support that had surrounded her throughout her life. As she stepped up to the podium to give her speech, She looked out at the crowd and her eyes found her parents. She smiled a small private smile just for them. My father taught me the value of hard work and integrity. She began, her voice clear and steady. He taught me that true wealth is not measured in dollars and cents, but in the love you give and the lives you touch. Her gaze shifted to Annalise and my mother. She continued, her voice softening. She taught me the power of second chances. She taught me that it's never too late to change your life, to find your purpose, to become the person you were always meant to be together. They taught me that love is the most powerful force in the universe, a force that can bridge any divide, heal any wound, and create a future that is brighter than you could ever imagine. Liam and Annalise listened to their daughter's words, their hearts swelling with a pride so immense it felt like it might burst. They looked at each other, and in that shared glance, they saw a reflection of their own journey, a journey that had taken them from a place of loneliness and despair to a place of joy and fulfillment, a journey that had been paved with kindness and trust and a love that had defied all the odds. After the ceremony, they walked back to their car, their arms around each other, Maya walking ahead of them, her diploma held high in the air. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the campus. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and celebration, a symphony of hope and promise for the future. As they reached their car, Liam turned to Annalise and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than words can say." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I love you too," she said. "I will always love you." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in the warmth of their love, the world around them fading into the background. They were no longer the billionaire and the carpenter. They were just two people who had found in each other a love that was as timeless and as enduring as the stars that were beginning to appear in the twilight sky. Their story was a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected of places, that kindness can change the course of a life, and that true happiness is not about what you have, but who you have to share it with. And as they drove home that night, their daughter asleep in the back seat, their hearts full of a love that was as vast and as beautiful as the night sky, they knew that their adventure was far from over. It was just beginning, a new chapter, in a story that was still being written, a story of a love that was destined to last forever. The years that followed were filled with the quiet rhythm of a life well lived. Maya went off to college to study architecture, a passion she had inherited from her father and her mother. She had a talent for creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but also functional and inviting, a reflection of the home she had grown up in. Liam and Annalise found themselves with an empty nest, a new chapter in their own lives. They filled it with travel, with new hobbies, with a deeper and more profound connection to each other. They explored the world together, hand in hand, marveling at the beauty of ancient ruins and the wonder of foreign cultures. But they always returned to their small, charming house in the quiet suburban neighborhood, the place they called home one summer evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Liam turned to Annalise and said, "Do you remember the first time we met in the ice cream shop?" She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Of course I do," she said. "You were so proud and so sad all at once, and I was so lonely I didn't even know it." He chuckled. "I was just trying to buy my daughter a $1 ice cream cone," he said. "And I ended up with a whole new life." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with time. "You didn't just get a new life, Liam," she said. "You gave me one." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the gentle creak of the swing and the soft chirping of the crickets. The air was warm and fragrant, with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. It was a perfect summer night, a night that felt like a gift, a blessing, a reminder of all the good things in their lives. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the yard, Liam pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple gold locket On a delicate chain, he had had it engraved with a single word. Forever, Annalise's eyes filled with tears as he fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He kissed her softly. "I wanted to give you something to remind you that our love is forever," he said, "that no matter what happens, we will always have each other." She touched the locket, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool metal. "I will cherish it always," she said. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the locket resting against her heart, a silent promise of a love that would never fade, a love that would continue to grow and evolve with each passing year, a love that was as real and as true as the stars that shone down on them from the heavens above. Their story was not a fantasy. It was a testament to the enduring power of love, to the resilience of the human spirit, and to the transformative magic of kindness. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a legacy of love that would continue to inspire and to uplift all who heard it. And as they sat on their porch swing on that perfect summer night, they knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them. A future filled with love and laughter and the quiet joy of a life shared with the one you were always meant to find. And so they lived happily ever after. Not in a grand castle or a sprawling estate, but in the simple everyday moments of a life built on a foundation of love and trust. A life that was richer and more fulfilling than either of them could have ever imagined. It was a life that was as beautiful and as timeless as the love story that had brought them together. A love story that had started with a single scoop of ice cream and had ended with a forever that was as sweet and as satisfying as the first taste of magic on a hot summer day. Their golden years were just that golden. They watched their grandchildren play in the same backyard where Maya had once chased butterflies, their laughter echoing through the trees, a sweet symphony of a life well lived. Liam's hands were no longer stained with grease, but with the rich soil of the garden he tended with a meticulous care that bordered on obsession. Annalise had traded her boardrooms for book clubs, her power suits for comfortable cardigans. Her life was no longer about acquisitions and mergers, but about the quiet joy of a perfectly brewed cup of tea and a good novel. They were a portrait of contentment, a testament to a love that had not just survived, but thrived in the face of adversity. Their story had become a local legend, a modern-day fable that parents told their children as a reminder that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they sat on their porch wrapped in warm blankets, a young journalist from a national magazine came to interview them. She was bright and ambitious, with a notebook full of questions about their unlikely love story. She wanted to know about the billionaire and the carpenter, the fairy tale romance that had captured the hearts of a nation. Annalise smiled and politely declined to answer her questions. "Our story is not for sale," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not a headline or a soundbite. It's a life. It's our life." The journalist was disappointed but respectful. She packed up her things and left, leaving them in the quiet solitude of their afternoon. As she drove away, she looked back at the small, charming house and the elderly couple on the porch, and she realized that she had missed the real story. The story was not in the details of their past, but in the quiet contentment of their present. It was in the way they looked at each other with a love that was as deep and as enduring as the ancient oak tree in their front yard. It was a story that could not be captured in words or pictures. It could only be felt in the heart, and as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues of red and orange, Liam turned to Annalise and took her hand. "Still happy?" he asked. She smiled and squeezed his hand always. She said they sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. Their love, a beacon of hope and inspiration, in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. Their story, a timeless reminder that true love knows no boundaries, no class, no limitations. It only knows the language of the heart, a language that is universal and eternal. And so they lived on in the hearts and minds of all who knew them, a symbol of a love that was as real and as true as the stars, that shone down on them from the heavens above, a love that was destined to last forever and a day, and in the end, that was the only story that truly mattered. The one they wrote together every single day of their lives, a story of love and laughter, and a forever that was as sweet as the memory of a single scoop of magic ice cream on a hot summer day. Their legacy lived on, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the lives they had touched, the hearts they had healed, and the love they had shared. It was a legacy that was woven into the very fabric of the community. They had helped to build a community that was stronger and more compassionate because of their presence. Their home became a gathering place, a haven for friends and family, a place where laughter always echoed and love always abounded. The scent of Liam's woodworking and Annalise's baking mingled in the air, a comforting aroma that was as familiar as the changing of the seasons. They celebrated birthdays and holidays with a joyful chaos that filled every room. They mourned losses and comforted each other with a quiet strength that was born of a deep and abiding love. Their life was a tapestry of shared experiences, a rich and vibrant testament to the beauty of a life lived with purpose and with passion. They taught their grandchildren the value of kindness and compassion, the importance of following your dreams, and the power of a love that is unconditional and unwavering. They were the heart of their family, the anchors in a world that was constantly changing, a source of wisdom and of love that would guide them through the years to come. One day, a young couple who had just moved into the neighborhood came to visit them. They were struggling to make ends meet, their faces etched with the worry and the fear that Liam and Annalise knew so well. They had heard the stories about the kind couple on the corner, and they had come seeking not charity, but advice. Annalise welcomed them with a warm smile and a plate of freshly baked cookies. Liam listened to their story with a compassionate ear, his eyes full of a wisdom that had been earned through years of his own struggles. When they had finished, he didn't offer them money. He offered them something far more valuable. He offered them hope. He told them his own story, the story of a single father who had been on the verge of losing everything. The story of a woman who had shown him that kindness could change the world. The young couple listened with tears in their eyes, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of possibility. They left that day with a lighter step, a brighter outlook, and a deep and abiding gratitude for the kindness they had been shown. And as Liam and Annalise watched them walk away hand in hand, they knew that their work was not yet done. Their love story was not just their own. It was a story that belonged to everyone, a story that had the power to inspire, to heal, and to change the world. One small act of kindness at a time, it was a legacy that would continue to grow and to flourish long after they were gone, a ripple of love that would spread out into the world and touch countless lives in ways they could never have imagined. It was the ultimate testament to a love that was as infinite and as enduring as the universe itself, a love that was truly forever.